Hi guys, it's Alex
and Jim
from the Old Warlock. We're so excited to have you guys back. You're about to notice a new smattering of videos where we are all wearing the same clothing for everyone. Isn't that exciting? Don't you think so?
They won't know that because we'll release them every couple weeks, and no one would have picked up on that if you hadn't said something.
Well, I'm very self-conscious about it, but the video that we're going to be making today, and who knows if this is going to be the first one released, what are we talking about?
We're talking about you.
We are talking about Metamorphosis Alpha.
It is so hard to get good help.
And we're very, very excited. We actually haven't played this yet.
You haven't played it.
Did you play it without me?
No. Well, before you were born.
Oh,
yes.
okay, that's true. Recently, we haven't played this, but you got this as a gift from actually a wonderful young man not all that long ago.
My youngest son, Zachary.
Mm-hmm. And?
Oh, and my older son, Alexander.
We got this, and we are very much looking forward to playing it. So,
yeah, I asked, you got this for me for Christmas?
For Christmas, yeah.
I think. And it's something that as those of you who watch the channel know, I am spending a lot of time, I have spent a lot of time over the years trying to gather up all the early TSR role-playing games. One of the ones that I can't find an original copy of is Metamorphosis Alpha. So I asked for the second best thing, which is this re-release of Metamorphosis Alpha, which is actually really cool. Wanted to go over it a little bit with you today just to show you the contents. And for those of you who are interested in old school and old role-playing games, hopefully this will encourage, our presentation will encourage you to pick up a copy of this.
Let's dive in.
Let's take a look. So, Metamorphosis Alpha. This was designed by one of my favorite game designers ever, James Ward. And this came out in 1976. And this is not too long after...
Well said.
After.
He's so eloquent.
After Dungeons & Dragons itself came out. And the story goes that James Ward, who met Gary Gygax in a bookstore, they met each other because they both went to the bookstore and picked up the same, I think it was 7 history books from the bookstore, the exact same 7, and they saw that they were both carrying the same books and struck up a conversation. Well, that led to James Ward working with Gary Gygax, being an integral part of TSR in the early days. And then going on after his time at TSR to become a very successful game designer in his own right. But James Ward, sorry, I don't exactly know where I was going with all that. I just like talking about James Ward because, as I said, he's one of my favorite game designers.
This whole thing ties very much into Dungeons & Dragons history. So,
yeah, we'll get there maybe in a roundabout way. But James Ward, when they were playing Dungeons & Dragons, he used to play on... Am I doing this a lot? Is that why you're doing that?
Yeah, sorry.
It's tough to have a mocking son all the time.
Oh, yeah, a mocking son.
Anyway, James Ward, when he went to work for Gary Gygax, he played a lot of Dungeons & Dragons in Gary Gygax's Greyhawk world. And he went to Gary at one point and said, you know, it would be really fun to take this whole role-playing thing and put it into a science fiction setting. Gary Gygax said, okay, why don't you go ahead and do that, and we'll see what comes up. Or what you can come up with. And that was how Metamorphosis Alpha was created by Jim Ward. Now, a lot of people say that Metamorphosis Alpha, which came out in 1976, was the precursor to Gamma World, which is another game designed by Jim Ward, which I love. So two of my favorite games.
Which we also have talked about extensively in some previous videos.
Yes.
So go ahead and check those out if you don't know what we're referring to.
Yes. But two of my favorite games, and they're both science fiction, were developed by Jim Ward, Metamorphosis Alpha and Gamma World. And I'm just going to throw this out there because it's really cool to me. I was lucky enough to get this from an auction of things that were owned by Jim Ward. This is a dice bag that he owned. Now, did he play with this dice bag at the table? Probably not.
It's in very good condition.
But it's never been used. But I'm holding on to the fact that this was Jim Ward's dice bag.
Touched by one of the Allfathers.
But I digress. Let's talk about before the ceiling collapses, let's talk about Metamorphosis Alpha and what it actually is. When the game came out, the idea was, you know what? Instead of me paraphrasing, I'm just going to read straight out of this what Jim Ward says about Metamorphosis Alpha himself. And again, this is out of the Deluxe Collector's Edition. This has all of the original information of Metamorphosis Alpha, but also included in this are all of the articles which came out in Dragon Magazine and other magazines that were related to Metamorphosis Alpha. There's a lot about the history of the development of Metamorphosis Alpha. There's a lot of early TSR history in here. I mean, if you're interested in this old school history, you really need to pick this up. And then there are all kinds of copies, character sheets, playtesting sheets, things like that. It's a real wealth of coolness as far as the history of role-playing games is concerned. But I'm just going to read a little bit of this. Bear with me, because as I said, Jim Ward can describe the game better than I can. Let me see here what I wanted to start with. Let's do that later. Okay, in the early days, in the first days of role-playing, I suggested to Gary Gygax that he do a science fiction version of the D&D game. I had been playing D&D for several months and enjoyed the otherworldly places the game took me. I had no idea of the honor and trust Gary was giving me when he suggested I give the effort a try. Over the years, there's been no better definition of Metamorphosis Alpha than that the game is a dungeon in outer space, which is essentially that.
Like a mega dungeon in outer space.
Let me get to the actual game description. I would say entertain the people for a few minutes, but I'm here. This is the game. I'm going to use the description of the game to describe the game. Mankind's urge to explore and expand its frontiers finally caused another push into the vastness of space. Okay, so this is the background of Metamorphosis Alpha. For hundreds of years, colonization ships of all kinds left Earth seeking a better life. Many found their new homes for better or for worse, but for one reason or another, scores of these colonization starships never reached their destination. This game is based on just such an event, the fate of a colony ship which became lost. The starship Warden, named after Jim Ward, the Warden, was created from the designs used in the United Western Starship Cartel program, and it was laid down in the Trans-Plutonian space yards in 2277, etc., etc., etc. The ship was an incredible 50 miles in length, with a width of 25 miles and a height of 8.5 miles. Additional levels above and below the central one brought the total number of decks on board the Warden to 17. That's where the entire Metamorphosis Alpha game takes place, is on board this Starship Warden, which is, as I said,
big.
25 miles wide, 50 miles long, and 8.5 miles tall. With its cargo of the flora and fauna of Earth, 1.5 million colonists, and 50,000 crew members, this ship set forth to try and get to another planet to colonize on behalf of Earthlings. But some 1/3 of the way to the planetary destination which had been selected for the Warden stretched the very fringe of a cloud of space radiation. Long story short, the Warden hit this space radiation. They should have been able to deal with it, but it was of a radiation that no one had ever come across before. It ended up killing most of the people. It ended up disrupting most of the systems, and the ship ended up missing its target and just continued to sail off into space, guided by robots and computers that were already on board the ship. Life became a struggle merely to survive for the humans that survived the encounter. In this struggle, all knowledge of the ship's mission, or even in fact that the humans were on a ship, was lost. Ship's systems were maintained in a minimum operative state by the vessel's main computer and the robots that were operating at the time of the radioactive cloud's entry into the starship. Later generations of humans lost all sense of identity, with the ship regressing into a state of savagery. Life quickly stabilized, as life has a habit of doing, With new life forms created from exposure to the unknown radiation, the humans settled into a tribal way of life, and those few that traveled and came back, in other words, went to other levels of the ship and came back, told of areas where the animals walked like men and plants were able to talk and move. The vessel traveled on past its assigned planet with its safety systems preventing the ship's destruction from crashing into a planet or burning up in a sun. It is only a matter of time until even these almost perfect systems, however, fail and the starship dies. Until that time, life continues to flourish and the Warden travels on, much changed from what it once was. So that's the background of the thing, and
very cool concept.
It really is. And Jim Ward he said that he claims to have had some inspiration from a number of different books and things for creating this, but I don't care where the inspiration came from. This game is actually a really, really creative concept.
Yeah, it is. Especially for this kind of being it seems like the first sci-fi foray for some of these games, these early games.
It really
this
is.
Being the subject matter that they came up with is something that's like a little bit shocking to me. Because it's not where my mind goes when I think sci-fi. So, but it's still cool. I love it.
Right, and this really was it. This was the, when you're talking about role-playing games, and TSR at the time, we're talking late 70s, they were really trying to capture all of the different role-playing scenarios, if you will, that they could to just try and get a jump start in the competition. So they did the fantasy role-playing. They did, as you get into the late 70s and into the early 80s, they've got the 1920s role-playing in Gangbusters. They've got Gamma World, but this was their first foray into science fiction.
Yeah.
And it has been popular ever since 1976. Now, quick side note before we look a little bit closer at the book. Those of you who have ever played the module Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, which is a D&D module, well, guess what? That was a module that was the introduction to, that was meant to introduce people to science fiction fantasy role-playing, and Metamorphosis Alpha in particular, because Expedition to the Barrier Peaks is all about your D&D characters going to a cave in the Barrier Peaks where there are all kinds of crazy monsters coming out of it. Well, guess what? That cave is an entrance into a ship like the Warden that had crashed, and all of these creatures were now coming out. So if you've played and love Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, and some people rate that as one of the top 5 modules of all time. Yeah. If you've played it and loved it, and it is a cool module, that's a direct tie-in to Metamorphosis Alpha.
Yeah.
Jim Ward loved the idea that this game was extremely difficult. When he ran it at cons in various places, most of the time people seem to have survived, but when he talks about actually playing the game with others, he refers to TPKs, which is total party kills. This is supposed to be a very deadly game, and it ends up being that way if you read any of the descriptions of people having played it back in the day, or even playing it today. Not a game you're easily going to survive. But to me, that's really cool. One of the other more interesting things about this game is that he leaves the idea of level advancement behind, which I'm starting to see in a lot of modern OSR games. Level advancement doesn't take place in this. The way that you increase the strengths of your character is just by the accumulation of knowledge and the accumulation of technology and the accumulation of more special weapons. So on one, you start with your spear, next thing you know, you got a blaster. That's how Jim Ward interpreted, that's how character progression was made to function in Metamorphosis Alpha, which I think is a great idea. So the cool stuff about this, like I said, it's got the introduction and history of the game. This is written by Tim Kask, who is somebody that I follow on YouTube. I really enjoy listening to him and his recollections on early D&D and his interpretation of more modern D&D. There is the history of Metamorphosis Alpha by John Peterson. John Peterson, to me, if you haven't read any of his books about the history of role-playing games, you really should. Extremely scholarly tomes. But boy, they have some great information. And I've read whenever John Peterson comes out with another book, I always make sure that I pick up whatever it is he's talking about this time, because the man does amazing research and has really good insight into the history of role-playing games. There's an interview in here with James Ward. talking about how he got started with the game, what he ended up doing with the game. And then there is the original 1976 publication, Metamorphosis Alpha, fantastic role-playing game of science fiction adventures on a lost starship.
Ba-na-na.
That's kind of the wrong theme music. Bum, bum, bum.
Bum.
Yeah, that doesn't work with this.
Oh, okay.
Anyway.
My bad.
So anyway, there are original drawings here. This is basically just a blown-up copy of the original rule set. Then, after you get through the rule set and you're ready to play the game, with mutated animals, mutated plants, all kinds of monsters that you can encounter, all kinds of treasures and such. The next thing that you end up coming into, there's a really cool side view of the Warden spaceship. Some character sheets.
Oh, I hate to interrupt, but we do need to get a thumbnail image for Zachary.
Oh, that's a very good point.
He edits the video. Okay.
Then the great. Sorry about that, but we have to keep the video guy happy because we just do. But the great thing about this, in addition to all of that coolness that we've already talked about, is that there's a gathering of all of the magazine articles and supplements that came out for Metamorphosis Alpha included in this book. First one is Metamorphosis Alpha, a review by Robert Taylor, first published in the Space Gamer, number 10, February, March 1977. Next one, Notes on the Androids on the Starship Warden by Jim Ward, published in Dragon number 4, October 1976. So, and there are just no end of these. They go on, we're up to 1978, Robots as Players in Metamorphosis Alpha from the Dragon number 14. I can continue up to, this is something that was created by Jim Ward, Footsteps in the Sky from Dragon number 19, October 78. Goes into 81, and then you end up with another section here that was created by Jim Ward, New Creatures and Non-Player Characters for Metamorphosis Alpha. So this has been brought full circle, and there are things that you can add in and play with your game today, things that have been created recently. So to me, this is a really interesting, I don't know, it's a really cool history, but it's also a totally playable game
100%.
Out of this book.
And the actual game portion of the book isn't that big.
No.
It's pretty small and straightforward. A lot of this stuff is strictly supplemental. And I haven't done nearly as much exploring as you probably have looking at like drive-through RPG and sites like that for these kinds of collections. But it seems like this style of having just everything in one spot is super. I've never seen anything else that's compiled quite the way this is. And maybe it's just because it is a smaller game and it's easier to collect all of the
the supplements that came out
stuff that comes with it, but I like having everything that was ever created, at least in any official capacity for the game, all in one spot. I think that's really neat.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I also like the fact that not only has the publisher, and the publisher is Goodman Games, I believe.
Yeah, and
Goodman Games, yes. Goodman Games, they did a great job in putting this together. The people who run Goodman Games are really into this kind of approach to old school role-playing games. They like to gather up all this information and make sure that it gets preserved. At least that's the way it seems to me, because everything I've come across from them kind of points toward this attitude. But not only do they have all of the original things and things that came out shortly after or over the years, there's also a lot of new stuff that has been included in this to make it a book about a game that spans 40 years. One of the things that is included in here at the very end is an introductory adventure for Metamorphosis Alpha designed by James Ward. It's called Coming of Age. So you can jump right in and play this if you want to. But another one of the great things about this book, on top of all of the stuff that I've discussed, is the artwork. And
it is very cool.
If you want to look at old school artwork, he's got, Goodman Games went back and pulled a lot of the original artwork straight into this. You can, and when you look at this, it's
player's handbook, DM
exactly.
guide,
It's
art. Yeah,
the artists are the exact same people. And to me, that is another really positive side of this publication. I always like buying these books just to see the artwork. I mean, that's a very important part to me.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm not going to go into too much more detail on it. Those of you who know about Metamorphosis Alpha or who remember it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Those of you who like to explore old school games and maybe take a step into them and play them, Metamorphosis Alpha Deluxe Collector's Edition by Goodman Games, you really can't go wrong by picking this up. You had a bit of a problem getting this.
I was just going to say that. So we knew that he wanted this, and so we went out to try and find it. It's very, very, at least at the time, this is in like November, December of 2022, this was very, very difficult for us to find. We had to order it from the UK, and it took 3-4 weeks to get here because they were the only distributor that we could find online that wasn't some kind of like questionable secondhand seller. The only place we could get it new was from the UK, and it did take a long time. I don't know if that's changed, so just go through and do some research on it. But if you do want to pick up a copy, just be warned, it's going to be a little bit pricey, and it's going to be kind of tough to come across as well. Unless something's changed significantly, and like they're on Drive-Thru-RPG and really pushing them now.
Or Goodman Games may have done a reprint, a second printing.
And I feel like
whatever.
that may have been the issue, is that they just weren't printing them anymore. And so it was kind of tough to find one that somebody was willing to let go. But it is definitely worth the purchase. It's a really cool thing, and I'm very excited to play it. Again, I haven't yet, but...
Well, and it's been 40 years since I've played this as well.
Yeah.
But again, it's something that I've been seeking for a long period of time. Finally found it. The price of this one, the cover price on this one is $80. I don't know what you guys ended up having to pay for it.
80 to 100, somewhere in there. So not crazy, but
at the same time, I think it's money well spent if you're interested in those early role-playing game.
Very much so. So if you like this subject matter, go and check one out. Once we do play this with the group we usually play, which I'm sure will happen here at some point, we'll probably make a follow-up either in a podcast or video talking about it and our experiences with it. But if you like this kind of content, be sure to check out our other videos about Gamma Worlds and Pirate Borg, which I mentioned in here as well. So a lot of not D&D OSR stuff. We do talk about that as well. And those are published, so go take a look.
But Metamorphosis Alpha, dungeon in space. You're on a ship. You have to go from level to level trying to get technology and trying to get back into a civilized state of being, as it were. Check it out. I think that you're going to like it. One thing, before we go, I would like to... Let me start over again. We have been remiss in thanking our Patreon subscribers.
Yes, we have been.
We've got a number of people who, I got to be honest with you, we probably would not be running the channel without their assistance.
They're very important, yes.
And we have just been terrible people not thanking them in video for the assistance that they're giving us. Patreon subscribers, thank you for everything that you're allowing us to go and do.
Very much. We love all the interactions that we have with all you guys, and if you are interested in becoming a patron, I don't know, I always screw that up when I say it. If you're interested in becoming a patron, the link is down in the description below. So if you want to go take a look at that, feel free. But if not, we'll keep making these things to put on YouTube. So
yeah. Anyway.
Last thing I want to say, if you've ever seen the original Star Trek series episode where that weird thing that's like spinning around comes onto the ship and they've brought the other people on board and then they all start fighting each other with swords.
Oh, the Klingons.
I don't remember what the episode's called.
I know
it's this one right here. That's what this reminds me of. Same thing. Yeah. Yep. So.
Anyway, anything else you wanted to say?
Nope. That's all I got.
I am Jim.
I'm Alex.
Keep your sword on free.
Toodaloo now.